Have you ever wondered how to secure your company and the value associated with technology, intellectual property, even if you're just a small 5-man shop? Have you ever thought about the risk associated with your technology? Well, today I had the opportunity to visit with Brandyn Fisher of the Mako Group, and the Mako Group is a cyber security type company. And what they do is they test, they go in and try to infiltrate your infrastructure to see, just where the chinks in the armor are. Because, we live in a day and age where data can be stolen and resold on the dark web. I had the opportunity to visit with them, and I have to tell you, it's a not so much concerning, but it makes you pause and wonder, am I secure? So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Brandyn Fisher.
Please welcome.
This is another episode of the Defenders of Business Value podcast. A podcast where we talk about what makes a business valuable, learn the tips and tactics to increase your company's value that only veteran deal makers know. And now, here's your host, Ed Meisogland.
I'm your host, Ed Meisogland. I teach business owners how to build value and identify and remove risks in their business so that one day they can sell their business at maximum value when they want, how they want, and to whom they want. I'm so excited to welcome Brandyn Fisher from the Mako Group. I was at an event at Butler University, and I got to talking to Brandyn about, just different things about technology and how it detracts from value. So I asked him if he would be willing to come and talk to us about, the things that detract as well as improve value of a business as it relates to technology and security. So Brandyn, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
So if you don't mind, can you give just kind of a high-level overview of you and the Mako Group? I know that you're doing an awful lot in this space, and I think our audience would really appreciate just kind of understanding what it is you guys do.
Absolutely. I work for a company called the Mako Group. We're headquartered out of Indianapolis, and we're a cyber risk and assurance-based group. So we do really a few different things. We do risk assessments, IT auditing, and then security pen testing. I've been with the Mako Group for about 7 years, and in my time there, I've done a little bit of everything under the sun there at the Mako Group. Right now, I manage and focus on managing our security testing team. We have a team of about 5 individuals on the security team. We perform network and application-based assessments for organizations. A lot of organizations do the testing for compliance reasons, but we're finding a lot of organizations these days are doing it just to bolster their own security and to generally do better. We do the assessments and provide feedback and recommendations to businesses and try to make their recommendations reasonable, affordable. A lot of the places think that improving security needs to be costly, and we try to spell that myth and show them that doesn't need to be costly by looking at the people, processes, and technology and taking a risk-based approach.
So when you talk about penetration, and the funny thing is, so when I bring this up to small business owners about as far as their technology, what do they have? What are they looking? What do they need to secure? The first thing is we have a website and we have email. The funny thing is when we're talking about newsletter lists and things like that, those are all assets and need to be locked down. So to the business owner that has no clue that this is even a risk in their business, talk about the penetration testing that you're doing and what that means to small business owners.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. A lot of people don't understand what all they have that can pose a risk to the organization. It's more than just your email server and your website. A lot of people are running things like remote services. So users VPN to the network. How are they VPNing in? And how are they getting access to those internal resources? There's also firewalls that are externally facing, web applications that maybe take sensitive information, personal information that you're collecting and then storing in a database that is all externally facing. Those are all attack vectors or points of entry into the network. And that's what we focus on first, is the external perimeter. How can we get into the network? The next step of that too is assuming you've had a breach or assuming there's somebody on your network, what can they do once they're on your internal network? And once we get into the internal network, the endpoints increase dramatically. Now we're looking at printers, workstations, security cameras, IP phones, IoT devices, thermostats, and TVs, and whatever else might be on the network. Once we get on that internal network, the attack surface increases dramatically, and we can do a lot more interesting things.
You said thermostat. What can they do with a thermostat?
So the thermostat, you're not going to be able to do the same things, obviously, as a workstation. You're not going to be able to get in there and, and get data off of it. But what we can do is try to get into that thermostat. If it's controlling something like, say, a data center, data closet, and there, maybe we can turn the thermostat off or turn it up or do something like that to damage the equipment.
Wow. So to the business owner that's saying, you know what, I'm 100% cloud-based. I use Google Suites. You know, what could possibly happen? Isn't it incumbent on the Google, on Salesforce, on all my virtual assets? Isn't it on them to protect? What do I need to worry about?
So that's partially true. So these cloud providers should be issuing reports called a SOC 2 report. And in that report, it will outline the security controls that they have taken to protect your data and your information. That report is also going to outline the steps that you are required to do as a user. So things like making sure you have a strong password policy in place. That's not Google's responsibility. That'll be the end user's responsibility to make sure that is deployed correctly throughout the enterprise. So just because you're using a cloud-based solution doesn't mean that you're off the hook completely. There's still things as an organization you need to review and consider when deploying those things.
When a buyer shows up, a buyer is looking at a particular business, and the entire point of their analysis is to identify and figure out how they can mitigate their risk in the acquisition. Most overlooked areas that we find is the cyber footprint. So not only the infrastructure, but also the virtual, what's outward facing and how do I control it? If I'm a buyer and I'm looking at that business, what's my checklist of things that I'm hoping not to find? And better yet, how do I find them? Or when do I know I need to employ someone like you?
So we actually work with businesses quite frequently when they're going through this acquisition phase to kind of evaluate the firm they're trying to purchase or acquire there. A couple of things to consider when looking at this and evaluating an organization. Have they done a pen test within the last 12 months? And what were the results of that pen test? So if there's anything high or critical within that pen test report, what the action plan doesn't necessarily need to be remediated at this time, but what is there at least an action plan in place? Are they taking action to correct these things?
So a pen test means penetration test, right?
Yes, penetration test where we're trying to simulate an attack from a malicious threat actor. I
can tell you, I would imagine that, I'm certain you probably know better than I. Are businesses really doing penetration testing every couple of years, or in your case, every year?
A lot of organizations are required to do it every year. So some of the ones that are maybe under compliance or regulatory requirements, they are doing it every year. And then we're finding a lot of firms that don't have that requirement are still doing them frequently. It may not be every year, maybe be every 18 months, but they are still doing on a pretty frequent and reoccurring basis.
So describe what a penetration test is. I mean, how do you orchestrate that? And I know when we were visiting at Butler, it was pretty interesting how you were doing it and the surprises to those folks that were in charge and had no idea where you were going to come in at. So talk about how the penetration test works and what do you do?
The first step in the penetration test can be to identify our rules of engagement. And this is where we're going to outline what we're allowed to do, when we're allowed to do it, and how we're allowed to do it. Once we have all those rules set, we have the time set on the calendar, we go ahead and start doing our thing. This is all done remotely. We're trying to simulate a third party, a malicious attack on the organization. So from our offices, then we'll try to attack the provided systems. On an external pen test, what we're going to try to do first is passive reconnaissance. We're going to go out there and try to find as much information on the organization as we can without actually touching their systems. And there's a couple of tools we'll primarily rely for this. Things like Shodan or Census. Those tools go out there and do a scan of the internet on a frequent basis, and then we can go out there and search their results and see what we can find on the organization. This allows us to get a footprint without actually touching the system, without showing that we're preparing for an attack on the system.
So let me stop you there. So what is it? What does it find? I'm just sitting here saying, okay, so you put this out. What are the results of what does something like that look like?
We're going to be able to go out there and see what services are specifically running on that system. So are they running a remote desktop server that's accessible from the internet? And what version are they running? Are they running a IIS web server, or are they running a Nginx web server, in what version? So we'll be able to go out there and just start pulling version and service information.
Anybody can see that as long as they have this kind of platform to search.
Yes, and these tools are free and accessible to anyone. So anyone can go out there right now and start searching that information.
Keep going.
The next thing we're going to look for is exposed, maybe passwords, your usernames or email addresses that we can find. So we're going to use LinkedIn first and foremost. We can go out there and start trying to look for people within the organization that maybe we can use for email phishing or try to reverse engineer some email addresses or usernames. We're also going to use a tool called WeLeakInfo that is similar to the Have I Been Pawned database. You can go out there and search the WeLeakInfo website and find clear text passwords that have maybe been leaked and other data breaches that are on the dark web. They're out there in a searchable format. We can go out there and search them. And if people are reusing their passwords or haven't changed them since the last data breach that they were involved in, we're still using them, we can go out there and try to do some credential spraying or stuffing attacks on the organization.
So that was a lot. So you can go into LinkedIn and identify potential targets for, I mean, what does a target look like? I mean, is it lower level folks or is it the upper level that you would assume, I hate to say it, but let's just say the older generation and, you know, where they have one password that's universal for everything that they do. Is that the targets? Where's the risk here?
So it kind of depends on where we're going with the attack. If we're doing some kind of social engineering attack, I usually look at job titles. I'm trying to find somebody who would likely send out the message I've crafted. A lot of times that's HR or IT related. So I'm looking for their positions or roles within the company. Other times we are looking for maybe somebody we would believe would reuse passwords or share the same password or something like that. And sometimes that is the older generation. Sometimes that's the less technical folks who maybe are working on a manufacturing floor or in an office somewhere that don't understand all the risks within IT.
Then what's your take like on like LastPass or OnePass, or I'm trying to think of, there's a couple others that are basically a password manager that you go to a website, it populates username and password and you're off to the races. Is that slow anything down or no?
I am a big fan of tools like LastPass. I use LastPass myself. With any of those tools, however, you still have to make sure you have those configured correctly. You can still put things like multi-factor authentication in place. You can make sure they're not signed in all the time. They're obviously putting all your passwords in one place is still a big risk, but there are ways to mitigate that risk. And I think it's a great tool to make sure users are using unique, strong passwords and not writing them down.
I use LastPass too, and it's great to use. It works on your cell phone, and I think everybody just doesn't understand is how universal this thing or these types of platforms are, and it's really not as inconvenient as you might think to employ them. IP theft. When I say IP, I'm talking intellectual property. That's a big thing. You know, I know, you know, it's in the news about Chinese coming in and stealing our intellectual property from various companies and stuff. What's the challenge to locking that down? I mean, it's password protected and there's all kinds of barriers to prevent theft, but yet it still keeps happening. Is it more internal or external infiltration, intellectual property, and what does the business owner have to do in order to lock it down?
It's a great question. The first step in locking down any intellectual property is going to be identify what intellectual property you have and where it lives. A lot of organizations assume that it is on a single server and that's all they need to protect is that server. When in reality, your users are transferring that all over the network, maybe sending it to their desktops, is doing it to other places that you're not aware of. So identifying what the data is and where it lives is the first step in securing that intellectual property. The next step is going to be create a bubble around that. When I say bubble, I mean all your security controls that you're applying to protect that data. You only need to apply it really to everywhere the data lives and moves. There's no need to apply it to every workstation within the environment. You can apply it to that select work environment, and then you can save some money and resources there by not applying it to everywhere. So once you identify where it lives, you create that bubble, and now you can start applying some controls around that to protect that data.
I can hear in the mind of the business owner right now saying, oh my God, that's one more thing I have to do. How difficult is it for a business owner to lock this down? I mean, what does that mean?
A lot of organizations equate security to buying a box or buying some kind of software and protecting their environment. What we like to do is kind of bring that back to the people, process, and technology. We want to get to the root of everything here. Do you have the proper policies in place, and are they being implemented? Doing simple things and basic things like setting up proper access controls, making sure you have a strong password policy in place, making sure users have as little privilege as needed to do their job. things like that can make sure that you're locking down the environment without going out there and spending a ton of money. They're things that kind of come back to the beginning of security, some basic core principles that still apply today, and they don't require a ton of money or new tools to actually implement.
So since the world continues to get smaller and smaller, and people are using platforms like Fiverr, Upwork, there is the sharing of files, or there's a sharing of Dropbox, or sharing of a Google folder. When you're doing that, how do you lock that down? I mean, or can you lock that down? Because I know a lot of business owners, they're using, instead of using internal sources, it's cheaper for them to go to Fiverr or wherever to get some external help. So, but at the same time, you are opening your infrastructure to that contractor. So how do you lock that down? Or do you?
Yeah, I think this comes back again to those SOC 2 reports. Those SOC 2 reports are going to tell you exactly what do you need to do to protect your data. And within those things like Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever cloud sharing service you might be using, you can set permissions, sometimes file-based, sometimes folder-based, but you can set specific permissions on each of those to make sure the data within that is locked down, and then what the user can do within that. Are users allowed to just read it? Can they download it? Can they send it to somebody? You can set all those individual permissions within that folder to lock it down.
I didn't know you could prevent it from being forwarded like in Google or Dropbox. I did not know that part.
Yeah, all of them are going to be a little bit different on what they can do, but the bigger ones usually have that kind of permissions. I know the one we use internally will allow us to limit who we can forward a particular folder to, prevent the unauthorized sharing of data internally.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have data rooms and things like that where we can dump our deals in and then control who gets to see what, when, and limit it there. But I'll have to investigate whether or not Dropbox and Google, because those are the two primary ones that most of the business owners at our level are using. So, and I would assume most in the audience are at least have some exposure to that. So what are the most targeted industries?
So that's kind of a tough question. It really depends on how you're looking at it. I think financial services is probably the most targeted based on the cost of the attack and the number of records exposed.
Oh,
healthcare is also hit a lot with ransomware. And I think these two industries are targeted a lot because they're under a lot of compliance. And what a lot of organizations think compliance equals security. And what we find time and time again is just because you comply with whatever regulatory guidances you're under, or you're meeting those regulatory requirements, doesn't mean that you're actually secure. And you might be missing the mark on some other areas. The regulatory guidances aren't always the most direct. They can sometimes be vague on how things should be implemented. And they're also not always all encompassing. A lot of the regulatory guidances may not touch on specific things like maybe vendor risk management, or tell you exactly how you should implement your password policy. So these organizations maybe are missing those kinds of things and leave themselves open to potential attacks.
So the business owner that's thinking, well, you know what, I'm off the radar. I mean, I'm too small. I've got 10 people here in the office. You know, we're not susceptible to be attacked. Is that true? I say no.
I think you're right on that. I think small businesses are still a victim and a target. 43% of small businesses in 2019 were a victim of some kind of cyber attack or incident.
Really? And so I know, just speaking, to a lot of, old, and I keep bringing up older, but, those that didn't necessarily grow up with computers, but, just use them as a tool. It's hard to determine what link not to click. And you find that most of the time, I'm hoping you can confirm this, it's not, they're attacking you. You're just opening the door and welcoming them in. Is that the way it works for the small business owner?
Yeah, I think that's one of the primary ways attackers are getting through firewalls and primary security devices, is through social engineering and email phishing. They're setting those out. Users are clicking those or entering their credentials into a phishing website and providing access to the attacker. Well,
I'll tell you, two of the ones that it used to be Dropbox. I sent you a link in Dropbox, and that would start it. And then DocuSign. We've seen a number a number from DocuSign. Is there other platforms that the big phishing schemes are coming through on?
I think a couple that I've seen lately, one of my favorite ones to use during our assessments is sometimes UPS and a UPS delivery notification. Oh, wow. We've also seen an uptick in Office 365 and trying to spoof the Office 365 login page for maybe SharePoint or email.
Wow. Yeah.
And then since we're in the midst of this pandemic right now, there's also been a large uptick in coronavirus related email phishing scams.
Yeah, and that's so terrible. I think hopefully there's a special place in hell for folks that are capitalizing on that. And you know what? And you had turned me on to the podcast Darknet Diaries. And the funny thing is, not all these people it's more gamified than it is malicious. And so I retract my, go to hell kind of thing. When someone infiltrates you and takes something, what are they going to do with it? I mean, what's the going rate on an email address, or what's the going rate on a telephone number that, we're all now getting robocalled? What's the point?
That's a good question. I mean, when someone infiltrates an organization and tries to steal data, a lot of times it's just for the street cred to say, I've done it, here's what I did. Some of this information is sold on the dark web or underground websites. And there's not a ton of value in it. There's, credit card numbers, they're sold in bunches pretty cheaply. I think the real value for attackers who are trying to steal personal identifiable information and stuff like that is stealing identities and trying to open up credit cards and do things fraudulently under people's identities. I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the harm coming from, opening up new loans and bank accounts and credit cards fraudulently.
Yeah, I get you. It's pretty frightening, but again, I think I continue to be surprised at how much information there is about you out there that you don't know. Like you were saying, the things that you deploy to crawl the web to find things about your infrastructure. Well, I'm assuming that you have the same ability to find about people and how that works. So it's a frightening thing. As a business owner, like I said, after I get done hyperventilating over all of this, so what are some of the small cost-effective steps that I can do? I know you said, password policies and such. Give me 3 steps. What can I do today to make my business more secure and ultimately more valuable? Because someone like you is going to show up and test and determine whether or not how risky the acquisition is. So what are the steps? And I said 3, but if there's 5 or however many, I don't care. But what are those things that I can do today that will help me preserve the value I have in my company?
So security doesn't have to be implemented overnight. When we talk about security, this is more of a marathon than a sprint. And that's important to remember, that you're not going to do it overnight there. The first step is always going to be to select a control framework, whether that's the NIST cybersecurity framework or the Center for Internet Security Top 20. But these frameworks tell you exactly, here's what you need to do to bolster the security of the organization. So after you selected your framework, then you need to perform a risk assessment and map your internal controls back to that framework to see what are you doing well within the organization and what are some areas you can improve on. And third-party organizations can do this. You can do this internally as a self-assessment, but it's important to get an idea of where you are internally before you start implementing all these controls. I can tell you the 3 big areas that we look at in every organization right away are perimeter security. Do you have the correct perimeter security devices in place? Do you have a firewall in place? Do you have antivirus in place? Those things that will help to hopefully keep out some of the threat actors. And the other things we're going to look at is, how's your patching? How are you doing your operating system patching? Are you missing critical patches, or are you pushing those out on a regular basis? And then beyond the operating system patching, how are you patching things like Adobe or Java or iTunes, those other applications that might not be included in your patch management program? And then the final thing we usually look at is surrounding access controls. And that can be, how is your password policy? Are you using multi-factor authentication? And then what user level permissions are there? Are users local administrator on the network, or do they follow the principle of least privilege, where they have as little access as necessary to do their job?
Having said that, we're seeing that there is cyber insurance, like cybersecurity insurance. Do you guys deal in any of that? I know you don't sell it, but I'm certain that you either are an advocate for it or you've seen it work or not work. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, cyber insurance is a great tool, but it's a reactive tool. So it only helps you after you have had an incident or been breached. It's not helping to actively prevent that. That being said, just like your home or car insurance, that it does serve a benefit and can help you ease the burden, financial burden after an incident. Because a lot of times there's more than just the settlements or fines that you see in the news. There's a lot of other costs associated with an incident. If anybody's looking for cyber insurance, some things to maybe look at and consider when evaluating different policies, make sure you know what you're buying. A lot of the policies will range widely. We've seen some policies that will cover ransomware ransom, while others will not cover that. So make sure you know what you're buying, and make sure you're buying from a reputable vendor. There's nothing worse than finding yourself in an incident, going to your cyber insurance provider, and then finding out that the coverage wasn't there, or there's maybe some misleading things that you should know up front. So make sure you're buying from a reputable vendor too.
Yeah, and a lot of insurances that it's already embedded in their existing insurance. I didn't know if there were like new riders and things like that based on the platform that the business owner is running on, whether or not they're, you can, if you're 100% cloud-based, your risk is lower because you have a third party that's managing your security, versus a server closet that has to be considerably different, especially in a small business environment where, that small business owner tends to be in charge of, making sure that the updates are being done and such. So, does insurance differ? And I know that's probably a little bit out of your wheelhouse, but have you heard or no?
So the cyber insurance providers we've talked to, typically they'll come out and do some kind of assessment on the organization, see what risk that organization has. And so I think that's where it comes into play, where are you cloud-based or do you have it on-premise in a data closet somewhere? And then based on that, I think they'll start offering you the different policy prices and stuff like that. So
yeah, I follow you. So is there any softwares you endorse? I know you and I are LastPass fans. Anything else that you would suggest?
Yeah, so as a company, we don't really resell software or tools. There's nothing we endorse necessarily as a company. One tool I have heard of recently is a tool called Priva. That's Privza. And that's a great tool for vendor risk management for organizations who need to evaluate the risk maybe their vendors are posing to their organization. So that's a pretty cool tool. We've seen a little bit when working with some of our clients that we've liked recently.
Wow. Okay. So when we first met, and I know we're short on time, but you had introduced me to Darknet Diaries. And for those of you that are looking for an interesting podcast, and this is in your wheelhouse, I mean, it's a fascinating podcast about the dark web and the things and the people behind some of the biggest infiltrations and I don't say bad stuff, but bad stuff that happens on the internet. So we were originally to talk about this on Friday the 13th, and then this little pandemic broke out, so we had to table it. So without naming names, do you have any story that shows the risk that the businesses that you guys are serving, anything that the Mako Group can share that would make people cringe?
I think one of the more scary things we can do these days when we're doing on our red team and pen testing engagements is what we call IPv6 takeover. So IPv6 is a network address on the internal networks usually, and it's handed out by default by most routers. So when a computer connects to the network, it'll request this IPv6 address and it'll be assigned one by the router. We've got a way to intercept that IPv6 request and then potentially launch remote code on the system requesting the IPv6 address. If we can launch code onto that system, we're able to do a lot of malicious things. Sometimes we get right in there and we already have privileged access on the machine. We can start doing some real nasty things. Other times we can start trying to search for data on that machine or try to dump password hashes or clear text passwords on the machine. And from there, it's pretty trivial to start pivoting throughout the network, accessing other machines and servers throughout.
So what's the best way that we can connect with you in the Mako Group?
Best way to connect with myself would be on LinkedIn. If you're looking to connect with the Mako Group, you can visit our website at makopro.com, or also we're pretty active on LinkedIn there as well.
I'll certainly have links to everything that we talked about in the show notes, but the services that you provide, I mean, what's the service that you would suggest that if a business owner was thinking either about selling the company or just to evaluate whether or not they're secure? What's the first step in contacting the Mako Group? And then from there, what is basically the process to engage you?
If you're looking to engage with the Mako Group, like you said, visiting our website, reaching out. From there, we can talk about what your needs are. And it's really going to be kind of customized to what you're looking for, what you're looking to do. The first step, I think, to evaluating any kind of acquisition or anything like that would be to do a risk assessment over the organization you're looking to acquire and see what they have in place, what they're maybe missing, and see if those deficiencies are significant enough to pose a high risk and make it a high risk possible environment, or if they're small enough where they can be easily corrected and integrated into the new environment.
As far as cost goes, it's just it's a scope thing. I'm assuming it depends on how extensive your testing is as well as how big the organization is, right?
Absolutely. It's all scope based, all customized and individualized to the client. So not going to break the bank, but it is scope based.
Well, Brandyn, you know what? Really, I'm so glad that we had the chance to visit, and I appreciate you sharing your experiences. And I do believe that there is technological risk, and this is something that will help business owners preserve their value. So, as Brandyn said, if you go to makopro.com, you can learn a little bit more about the Mako Group, or you can reach Brandyn on LinkedIn. And like I said, I will have links in the show notes. So, Brandyn, thank you so much again for being here and being a defender of business value.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
This was another episode of the Defenders of Business Value podcast. For more episodes packed with strategies to increase the value of your business, visit defendersofbusinessvalue.com for show notes, transcripts, and free tools to start you on your journey. Subscribe now so you don't miss any future episodes.